Okay, thank you, Regina. I got nominated for this, I guess, because I talk a lot. But the object here is for me not to talk a lot, but I'll try to say a few things that might encourage you to share a story because you may think what you have isn't what we're looking for. But we're interested in hearing anything that has to do with the mill. And if you're even my age, as old as I am, you can remember when mills were very important to not only to the farmers or cooks, but also to the wives they were still making things out of feed sacks when I was a kid. I never had to wear a feed sack dress, luckily, but my sister probably did. And also it's people who were passing by mills. They were social centers. People sat and talked. So we have a couple of fellows here with us that Roy I've spoken with before, and you all may know Mr. Roy Turpin here as the minister pastor at uh, Pleasant Valley Brethren Church there in Pleasant Valley on Allen Ridge Road. And he was also for a long time known to everybody as the Rainbow Bread Man. And he's lived a long and full and valuable life and picked up a lot of stories. And I know of one story he could tell us about going to the mill as a boy himself. And so if any of you remember going to the mill, going with your dad, um, uh, anything to do with the mill products, bacon, how much flour and meal you used, anything like that. And on my left here is Howard Dickerson, and Howard is one of the last people in Floyd County who actually did milling. And through this mill at one point, when I was 17, I graduated from high school, and I got a job 18 working for the Public Service Authority in Floyd. And that was the water and sewer people. And it was a good Floyd was a foreign country to me before then. I grew up in Indian Valley. We only went there to pay taxes or something like that. And so we'd eat lunch every day. And up there on the square, right in front of the courthouse in those diagonal parking lots, there'd be a big old brown, two-tone brown Buick station wagon. And there was a fellow there that looked like a hippie to me. And he had the tailgate down and he was selling buckwheat flour, which I'd heard of. And years later, I got acquainted with Howard Dickerson, and I found out that he may or may not have been a hippie, but he just had a long beard because he just got out of the army and he was tired of shaving every day, I think. So Howard has milled the buckwheat and sold it, and then he had a business also milling animal feeds, which is mostly what milling became here in the county at the end of it. The foodstuffs began to come in from outside the county. So we want to hear a story about anything having to do with it. We doubt if any of you were millers, but if you were, please tell us about that. And if you went to the mill or heard a good story about a mill, it could be true, is good, but if it's not true, that's all right too. As Roy and I were saying, sometimes things that aren't true have a lot of truth in them. You can pick out a lot of valuable lessons from that. So we have, as Regina said, a microphone, and we'll pass it around to anyone. And if someone out there wants to start us off, that would be great. And if not, we'll get Roy and Howard here to give us an example to get us started. Especially interested if you're in this community and have a story about this mill, which obviously ran in at least into the 70s when Howard was having his buckwheat here ground here. Sorry. Anyone out there want to start us off? Well, I'm just going to hand that to Roy, and I've given you a little context already. Roy went to the mill often. He grew up farming, and he can tell you about how important the mill was to them. He has knowledge of several different mills, and one of his stories was so interesting that it was included in this little history of Floyd County mills, and it's several people have commented about how much they enjoyed that story. And I think about it in many different contexts, how amazing it was that a young boy could do all that, among other things it tells us about the life that Roy was living. So if you'd be willing to share that, we'd love to hear it.
All right, my real milling day started when I was about 11 years old, I guess. But I want to back up a few years. When I was about 5 or 6, and my brother was 2 years older, we were given a task of pulling a little red wagon to a local mill next to home, which is about a mile and a half away, with a sack of corn, shell corn, and a man by the name of Martin Phillips and his wife named Desi. They would grind it for us, and they would take a toll. We might have got 3 gallon out of that, and they'd take a toll, maybe a quart or something like that. So that's when my milling day really started, Little Red Wagon. But later on, when I was about 11 years old, we always worked horses. And my dad trusted me with his horses, and to trust somebody with horses, it meant a whole lot because those horses, they were your livelihood. So we would sack up ear corn with shuck and all the day before and load the wagon with the corn and baled hay and bundles of oats. And after milking time was over, we milked about 12 or 15 heads of cattle. I head to the mill either with a 1 horse wagon or a 2 horse wagon. With a 1 horse wagon, we'd have to go every week. 2 horse wagon, maybe every 2.5, 3 weeks. It was about 7 or 8 miles from home, and of course in the wintertime it's pretty rough. In cold weather, sometimes your feet get cold. I had plenty of clothes on, but had socks and shoes on, but your feet still get cold. I'd get off the wagon and just walk in front of the horse with the halter open in my pocket or whatever, and horse would follow until I kind of warmed up a little bit.
I want to interrupt you and ask you to give us a little, so these folks, if they know that territory, like where you lived and what the mills you're going to.
All right. I lived in kind of the Allen Ridge area, kind of across from Duncan Chapel Church of the Brethren. And the first mill we went to was called the Greasy Creek Mill. The second one, of course, was known as the Vaughn Mill. And that was one time after the Greasy Creek Mill had closed down, I got word that the Vaughn Mill was closed down for about 3 or 4 days, putting in a new engine or something or other, and I had to go all the way to the Webb's Mill over in Route 8, which was quite a distance. But back up to the story, I'd be heading to the mill in wintertime in particular, and I took a shortcut across, I believe, 749. It's known as Rocky Hill Road now. It cut off for several miles, and I see ice up ahead, and I knew the horse couldn't stand up on that ice, so I would stop, and I'd always have a bag of ice head nails. It was nails that was about 3/8 of an inch longer than the regular horseshoe nails. I'd take out 2 nails of each side of the shoe and the front feet, and I would replace them with 2 more nails in each foot. And a boy at 11 years old, had to have some skill to do that. So you drive the nail in, and the nail would stick out about an inch, and you twist it off with the claw hammer. Then you had to take a rasp and put it underneath the nail and hit it with a hammer and to clench that nail, hold the shoe on. Then you go on to the mill, of course, and the only road was hardtop that day and time was 787, known as the Indian Valley Road. And by the time you got to the mill, of course, those nails would be wore off flat again, and you'd have to replace them on the way back. But while I was at the mill, there'd be about 12 or 15 pickup trucks ahead of me, maybe a car or two with the trunks full of stuff, and I'd have to park way out there somewhere. And Mr. Aubrey Harris ran the mill at that time. His brother owned the mill. I think his name was Hollis.
Right.
And he would say, a young man says, back that team of horses in. I could hear real good. And those men there, they would hear him say, that boy's real good. Watch him. Watch him back that team of horses in. He's real good. My head was swell. I mean, I felt big. I felt big, That made me feel so good. Him brag about me. I said, back up. One named Strawberry and one lady. Lady was lead horse. Strawberry was off horse. You know anything about horses? That's the way they worked. Lead horse, off horse. Of course, G and Ha. Anyway, I'd back that wagon. I'd say, whoa back, back up. I'd back all the way. I'd make sure that thing's plumb square against the dock. And of course, Mr. Harris say, see there? Those guys couldn't even back a pickup straight. I mean, the pickup be cockeyed. Other stuff. But I wanted to prove that Mr. Harris was right. That little boy was good. But we'd grind the feed, and I'd help him tie the sacks up and head on back home. And of course, summertime is no problem, but wintertime you'd have to adjust. And I remember one time in particular, I started back up the Rock Hill Road, and I thought maybe the nails was okay because 787 was basically covered with packed snow with cars run over. But while I was at the mill, the sun got up and it melted a little bit, and it stayed there, scraped the road down pretty short. But in my mind, I thought the nails probably still there a little bit. I started up this big old hill, and the horse fell down.
Oh.
The horse fell down. It was one horse wagon, and she fell in the shafts. And I remember this man and woman came along with a car, and they stopped down there because they had the road blocked, and they couldn't go any further. And they walked by and said, "We would help you, but he just got out of the hospital, back surgery." And I said, "It's okay, I'll be okay." I'd unloaded several sacks of feed and scotched my wagon because the wagon was sliding too, And a little bit later, a fellow by the name of Oscar Son just came along, a black man. He said, "I'll help you get up." And so I was able to unsnap one of the straps on the horse. It had a strap on this side and this side too, went back to the shafts. What that was for to hold the wagon back, in addition to the brakes in the wagon. But I couldn't get to the other side because she's laying on the other one. I carried a real sharp bowl knife with me all the time, and I was able to cut that strap. I knew Dad would get me for cutting this strap, but I had to do it. No other choice. I cut the strap, and we pulled the wagon out on the horse. And then Oscar and myself got a hold of the rope and drug a horse off the ice. Like I say, the ice was real slick, and horses went down about maybe 15 foot and able to get up. So we pulled the wagon back to the horse nose and loaded the feed back up and head on back in. And never will forget that occasion. And that was quite an ordeal. All right, what else about that?
Well, let's see if anybody else has got a story about going to the mill, and it doesn't have to be your own story, because some of the stories that I heard when we were working on this book were stories that they had been passed down through the family. Any of you go to the mill as a child, or hear your mom and dad talk about that?
I did.
Oh,
Well, just when I was a kid, that Dad and Granddad would go to the mill, and
what mill did they go to?
well, they normally would go to the Dodd Creek or the Webb's mill, and because they would they could take white corn and they would grind it to a cornmeal, and you could give you your own back. Of course, they'd take a toll, I guess, but whereas some mills said, "Well, we'll grind it, but we're going to give you what we, this other stuff. We're going to take, we'll take it, and,
Whatever comes out.
whatever comes out."
Yeah.
And occasionally we go to the Farmers Exchange Mill, and just as as a 5-year-old or 6-year-old kid, I'm looking there in the Farmers Exchange Mill, and the first thing you see is this hole in the floor where they would, I guess, pour everything in. No rail, just slick as it could be around there, and if you fell in, that'd be the end of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so later on in life, when I got in the insurance business and I look at that, I was thinking back about the liability prospects of that, but I guess that wasn't the problem back in the 60s. But that was my memory. We would that was always a big deal. Usually it would be on a Saturday morning. We go to a meal somewhere.
You're probably one of the youngest people who has a clear memory of that, because your family was one of the last ones to have the sheep and cattle and all those things, and to make a living at the mill. And a lot of people continued, but that was your living.
Yeah.
And he mentioned a couple of things that might be interesting to you all to know. The early mills in the county and many of the smaller ones up through the end of milling were what were called custom mills. They didn't handle any money. You brought in your wheat, and a bushel of wheat is 62 pounds, and you'd get something like 40 pounds of flour, and the rest of that would be bran, and it would be what they call middlings or seconds or something. It would be kind of yellow looking because it had the wheat germ in it, and the oil, and sadly it had also most of the nutrients. But people had figured out, and people back then weren't any smarter than we are, I guess. They somehow thought that the white flour was the best. And if you ever look at a picture from the 1930s on a farm, I can tell you that the kids were eating this white purified flour, and the hogs were eating the middling, and the hogs were a lot fatter than the kids were. Because they were getting the best part of the grain. And if you took your corn, you got it, and the wheat rate changed. The government set the rate. It would change during wars and so on. They have a huge long table for every amount of grain. You get this much flour, you get this much middlings or shorts or whatever they call it, and then you get this much bran. But with corn, it was set by the state of Virginia. The toll, which George mentioned and you mentioned too with your wagon, the toll, T-O-L-L, taking the toll, is by law in Virginia set at 1/8. So if you took in a bushel, that comes out to perfectly 1 gallon. And there's a story about and it's probably a story that has circulated from place to place, but this young boy like Roy here was excited to get his first chance to go to the mill by himself. And his dad had a horse, and he put a sack of corn over the back of the horse, and he tied the end and split it so some of the corn hung on each side, and he set the boy on the horse, and he went to the mill, and he wasn't the boy to talk too much, but he watched everything, and so the miller got the corn down, and first thing he did was dipped in the sack with his toll box, or toll dish they call it, and he got his 1/8 portion, and he set inside. And the boy didn't say anything, but he didn't like the looks of that. So he watched, and when the miller went around to attend to something else, he took it back and put it back in the sack. And it got ground, and the miller put it back on the horse. He was boy was too small to put it on there himself. He set the boy back up on the horse, and he went home, and he said, "How'd you do, son?" He said, "Good." And he said, "Do you have any trouble?" He said, "Well, just a little." He said, "That miller tried to steal some of our corn." He said, "Well, what did you do?" He said, "Well, I waited till he's gone, and I got it back." And that story, I would venture to say, has been told 100 times. You just insert the right people.
Yes.
But I'll give you this little bit of context, though. A distinct difference. The mills that were operated in this county, like Mabry Mill, the water-powered mills, until the advent of what's called a roller mill, which this mill never had, I don't believe. Milling was a little different than it would have been in Shakespeare's time. I had a point to this. Where am I going now? I need my wife here to punch me. What am I talking about? Well, I'll have to think. It'll come back to me later.
It's come back.
Yeah.
While you thinking about that, let me share something else. You be thinking.
I'll
I mean, one occasion I must have been about 12. I was backed up to the Grease Creek Mill and had the 2-horse wagon that time, and I remember so well. There was 2 young ladies walked out there, and I thought they're about my age, about 11 years old, and maybe one a little older, and a grown lady walked out in front of the horses, and all of a sudden, the youngest one of the 2 girls pulled out a camera and she took a picture. It had that flash on top of it. It made me kind of angry because I thought my horse was going to bolt.
Oh.
I had them tied back to the brake lever, and they did kind of bolt and put their ears up, and I thought they were going to head out because they went all the way deep water and they wouldn't have caught them. Well, that was, and anyway, they didn't, and I forgot about it. I just brushed it off, forgot about it, and I guess 40 years later or something, I found out there's a picture. Matter of fact, Aubrey's widow invited me to her house and gave me that picture. And last year, January 24, I did that young lady's funeral. Her name was Brenda Harris Higgs.
Oh, yeah.
And who would have thought 67 years after that picture was taken that I'd be doing her funeral? No one but God would know that, but that's something I will never forget. But I do remember that flash going off and my horse almost bolted. And I forgot about the ordeal until many years later that picture showed up. Of course, that picture is in the book, the meal book that Rick and Mr. Webb put together, and also have it in a book that I've got in the car. My 80th birthday celebration, Pastor's Pondering. That picture of those horses standing there. The horses look white, but they wasn't white. They were roan. It was taken with a black and white camera because it showed it white. And I'm standing on the meal beside somebody. I'm not sure who it was. And I was about that tall, but I felt big, because God knows team horses. But I never will forget that. And how ironic is that 11-year-old boy, 67 years later, be doing that little girl's funeral.
Oh.
We started in first grade together, and I lost track of she went to Indian Valley after that. And I met her about 4 years before she passed away with her husband down in North Carolina, and he had introduced her to me. And not knowing at that time that was the same little girl that and almost scared my horses.
Well, that picture that is a picture of his horses and his dad are in the book, and I have some books here. I'm not trying to sell you a book, but if you want one, I'll be glad to, and you're welcome to look at it, whether you want one or not, and I can point that picture out to you after we finish. The man in that picture beside Roy, we have not positively identified, but I would bet $100 it's my dad.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Because my dad was R.B. Harris's brother-in-law, and early in his marriage, my mom and dad said they moved 7 times the first year they were married. But he kept following her, so she finally just stayed where she's at, I reckon. And so he got a job at one point. He was laid off at the pipe shop or something, and he went to work at that mill. And I declare it's him standing there leaning up against that door.
I bet it was.
And little Roy there, and if you didn't know, you would not imagine that Roy was not the child of one of the customers. He was one of the customers. And he was not a passenger on that wagon. He was the driver of the wagon. What I was thinking of, it did come back to me, was in Europe, there was a custom that millers were corrupt and dishonest. And that was because they were typically granted a monopoly. Now here you had all these mills, they had to compete with one another, and that kept everybody honest. But if you ever got introduced to Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, there is a story called The Miller's Tale, which is not about him, but there's someone else's tale, and I think it's the Reeve maybe, and his story is about how corrupt and dishonest and immoral this miller is. And actually there was an expression that something is as heavy as a miller's thumb, because a miller would put his thumb on the scale. And but if you read the early legislation in Virginia, they took pains to make sure that didn't happen. And millers, by great contrast, in Floyd County at least, have a reputation of being honest, hard-working, kindly people, which was true in generally, or they wouldn't have business because they had to compete, and people would drive right by the business of a man who was disagreeable because they didn't have time to deal with that. And there was also a misconception about millers, which was that they were all wealthy, and that was wrong because these people who worked really hard all day in the fields apparently thought the millers didn't have much to do. They just stand around and watch the pulleys spin. But if you look into the history of mills as real estate, some of them got sold every 2 or 3 years, often because they gone bankrupt. But so that's what I was trying to remember to say. Now, Howard, is this jogged anything in your memory here about your experience as a miller or a customer of millers?
Well, I would have never known Harry Roberson if I hadn't decided to raise buckwheat. And back in the mid-70s, I was experimenting with various small grains on the farm to see if there was something I could raise and sell for a profit. And every time I brought up the subject of buckwheat, everybody says, you need to talk to Harry Roberson. So that's what I did. I came over and sat in Harry Roberson's living room and talked to him sitting on his couch about grinding some buckwheat, and told him what I wanted to do, and he was willing to do it. So after that, I started bringing my buckwheat over in 96-pound sacks. That's 2 bushels of buckwheat. First in a 57 Buick station wagon, later on in a pickup truck. And Harry liked what I brought him, and I liked what I brought back because I was able to sell it and actually make a profit. And of course, part of the profit in buckwheat was not that it sold for so much, but it cost so little to raise it. If you raise your own seed, it required very little fertilizer, and if you got a good stand, it took care of its own weed control. The only really tricky thing about it is trying to combine it. It was really hard to tell when the moisture was low enough to let that combine go through it without getting jammed up with too many stalks. And I remember the first year I raised it, I had too many weeds, and the guy that brought the combine over says, no, this is not going to work. The machine's going to jam up. He says, you need to get a binder in here. So back in the mid-'70s, you could hire a binder in Floyd County. And so one came in and bound up the buckwheat in little bundles, which were dumped out in the field, and we made them up in stacks and capped them off and waited for weeks for it to dry, and then took it back and threw it in the combine to thresh it. And I remember I lost 10 pounds in 2 days bringing those bundles in.
Oh.
So fortunately, the next year I got it right and I didn't have any weed problems. And this went on for about a decade. And farmers are inclined to eat what they raise. And I had buckwheat cakes every morning for about a decade that I cooked myself. And fortunately, once I cooked those buckwheats, I went to work, because if you'd have sat around, you'd probably got big as a barrel. And I remember Harry and I didn't discuss much, just farm stuff. He was a farmer, and a mail carrier, a barber, and he was my barber for quite a number of years. The only place I knew where you could get a haircut for $1. And I was really sorry when he closed the mill. He never told me why that happened, but I suspected that poor health had something to do with it. Anyway, I don't regret my buckwheat enterprise. I wish I was still bringing grain to the mill.
Buckwheat is a fascinating topic, and Howard could say more about it, but and he knows about this too. But for some reason, in writing this book, I was looking into some agricultural records for Virginia, and I think Howard can give you a little insight. But I've asked everywhere I go, if I go to a mill, I say, is buckwheat popular here? Sometimes it is, sometimes they've never heard of it. It's very hit or miss. But in about 1939, Carroll County and Floyd County together grew half of the buckwheat raised in Floyd County, Virginia. I mean, in the state of Virginia. And I don't want to get us off topic. I want to hear your stories, but I am interested to know if any of you grow up eating buckwheat cake? Roy did. Anyone else? One? Oh, well, I guess you did. Are you sick of buckwheat cake? Can you still eat them? Or? Oh, did you care for them then?
I did. I had too many of them.
Well, you got foundered on them, is what my mother would say. Howard gave me his recipe, and I have become a lover of buckwheat cakes. And they have a kind of a whang to do. The word, that's the only time I ever heard the word whang used to describe the taste of a buckwheat. They got a sort of a fermented kind of a taste to them, and they actually bubble up.
Back in those days, kids eat what was put on the table regardless. You didn't whine and say, I don't like this. You eat what was put on the table.
Yeah. And if you want to try buckwheat cakes, I have no commercial investment in this, but there's a little restaurant out on Route 58 between Hillsville and yeah, what's the name? Where's George at? Oh yeah, well, it's Crooked Oak Restaurant. I was telling, what's that little community next to it? It's not Medicine, it's Laurel Fork. It's between Laurel Fork and Hillsville. If you got a few extra dollars and want to take a risk, go out there and order buckwheat cakes and the sausage gravy or syrup or whatever, and you'll get a fair test whether you like buckwheat cakes or not. They're delicious. And it's a nice little place. The price is reasonable, and my wife says the ambiance isn't good. And I say, what does ambiance taste like? And how much does it cost a pound?
What is it?
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite places, but she likes the food, but not the ambiance, I guess. But so, anything about buckwheat?
The one thing about buckwheat that adapted it to this area was it doesn't need rich soils. It could thrive on poor acid soils, which we have plenty of here. And it's only a 70-day crop. So if a crop failed, or if you planted it behind the crop, you could still get something in that year. And the yields were not really great. I think some of the best yields I ever got may have been 30 bushels to the acre. but considering what you can do with it, that was a lot of buckwheat. And another thing that, well, it was a surprise to me when I had buckwheat milled here at Roberson Mill. The buckwheat bran, about half of the buckwheat comes out as bran. And what are you going to do with that? Well, it's about 22% protein.
Oh,
And so
whoa.
if you got a hog, I remember my hogs just about knocked me down when I'd come in the lot with a bucket full of that stuff. They knew what was good.
And chickens will eat it too, I guess.
And people could eat it too. It had a biological value the same as meat, but it's rather bland, and I never figured out how to cook it up, how to make it good. But buckwheat bran was a very valuable byproduct back in the day because people needed it, that protein for hogs and chickens and whatever.
And their kids, yeah, if they'd eat it. A little side note here: buckwheat is a corruption of Bach wheat, B-O-C-H, which is a German word. Which I don't speak German, but my understanding is it's the same word as beech, like a beech nut. And the connection is that a beech nut and a grain of buckwheat has a three-sided hull. And for that reason, because of that word, people that I think around here have always associated it with German culture. But my understanding is that it's actually from Asia, and it's not a grain at all. It's related to dock, like yellow dock, and the dock we think of as weed. So it's very interesting biologically too, I guess.
It's very close to a weed, which gives it an advantage of crowding out the other weeds. Because if you get a good stand of it, it's very aggressive when it grows.
And bees like it. You ever have bees in yours?
Well, I had people come to my place and bring bees to graze my buckwheat, and they would usually leave me with a quart of buckwheat honey when it was all over.
Is it dark?
And you could raise the lid on that buckwheat honey and smell those buckwheat blossoms coming off that honey.
Oh yeah. Well, so look into buckwheat if you're willing to try something different. And these modern foodie people call it kind of a superfood or something for the reasons that you're talking about. It's gluten-free, and I don't guess it has hardly any fat in it. I don't know.
No.
It's a really good stick with you kind of food. But if you're going to be making carbon copies all day, don't eat too many of them. But if you're going to the sawmill, buckwheat cakes will be good. Anyone else got a story? Jeff, you got any stories having spent a lot of time working on this mill? You must have talked to some people who came out to see what you were doing and shared some ideas. Or Regina, any of your family things you'd like to tell us?
I don't have a story right now, but I do know that since everybody was in the gift shop, we now have some bags of wheat and some bags of rye for sale.
Uh-huh.
Tom Maxey ground them in his mill and donated them.
Uh-huh. And your dad told me that he ground rye at one time. He said some people would want rye, and I said, well, what did they do with that? And I've always associated rye with liquor somehow. But he said they made biscuits out of it, and I said, how were they? He said they was the prettiest brown golden things you ever saw. How'd they taste? He said, pretty good for breakfast, but not so good after that. So apparently they didn't make a very good leftover. Jeff, did you have anything?
Well, I was from up north in Northern Virginia and ran Colvin Run Mill. And so I used to associate with a lot of the millers around there in Pennsylvania. And I had a real difficult time getting buckwheat. I asked these guys, both Howard and Ricky, a couple times, why was it such a big crop around here? Because I had to go to Pennsylvania to get it for Colvin Run, and I couldn't mill it. I had to wear a mask and cover myself up because for some reason I was deathly allergic to the flour dust that it put off. In fact, the guy who used to run Washington's grist mill, Ted Hazen, did some kind of memoir about the mill, and he put a little footnote in there that whenever he came to visit me and I was grinding buckwheat, I looked like I was in a hazmat suit because I just had to get covered up completely to keep the stuff off my skin and out of my nose and swallow. But I could eat buckwheat pancakes, and I'll put a plug in for Tom Maxey. He makes great buckwheat flour. I eat his buckwheat flour pancakes often. So, but buckwheat is just one of those interesting grains, and I just never had run into it that often over the years of working at Colvin Run until I came here. And of course, Howard was just a wealth of information on buckwheat. I only knew it as a cover crop that was also used as a flour. So, and made great pancakes, but I hadn't had it often. In fact, I'm one of those Northerners. I actually came from California to Connecticut to Virginia. I've been in Virginia longer than I've been anyplace else. So I've been here for over 50 years. And most of my life has been in historic preservation. So, and I started my career in milling, and I'm probably going to end my career milling here. So that's all I have to add.
My name's Tom Franco. We live up the road here, but I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, which was known for a whole different kind of mill, and really had no idea how these things had really run their course in another part of Appalachia, a less urban part of Appalachia. We came here in the late 70s, and I bought grain from Howard Dickerson for my chickens for 15 or 20 years. And but my story about this mill in buckwheat, it's a little skewed in some respects from the other stories. I reckon when we came here, I'm pretty sure we would have been called hippies. And one of the ways that we figured out, a few of us, to make a living was to go off and set out pine trees in the South, the rest of the South, the deeper South, but including parts of Virginia. I never set out pine trees in Floyd, but one year, talking to Doug Roberson on the road here, I said, Doug, we have a room in our school bus. We lived in a school bus when we went on these journeys. And I said, we got room if you want to come do some work, earn some money. Doug had helped me on some projects at the house. And he said, sure, I'll come. So I said, well, if you got anything to bring clothes, any spare money you might have to get through the first few weeks. And if you got any food, bring it. So we literally drove the bus up. Doug come out of the mill with a bag of buckwheat. Whole buckwheat, not flour. But we had a hand grinder on the bus. And we ground red wheat, now buckwheat, sometimes corn every morning, and made our little cakes that we'd eat for breakfast and then we'd eat for lunch when we were out in the field. We worked from sunup to sundown. And I just thought that'd be kind of a nice thing to know. Doug dragged probably somebody's looking for that bag today, but it went with us. We used it and enjoyed the heck out of it. So that's my little ring into the mill, into the buckwheat.
Do people in Pittsburgh eat buckwheat?
I ate buckwheat growing up.
You did.
Oh yeah. I had no idea where it came from. No idea. And I'm sure there were still mills around because Pittsburgh was like this. It was very rugged. There were mill sites everywhere. But of course, my family and everybody else were associated with the steel mills. So, but yes, we ate buckwheat growing up. And I still eat it occasionally.
Flour I bought came from maybe Scranton or somewhere in Pittsburgh. Uncle Tom's buckwheat, and they sold it in 5-pound bags down at Slaughter. I haven't seen it down in a long time.
Huh.
But if you see it, you like it, you eat it. Don't be afraid to get it in a big bag. Put it in the freezer and keep ready. It'll keep a long time. Don't take any worse when you get it out than it when you put it in.
Yeah, and we did grow it as a cover crop this year, and I harvested some of it, and I was curious if you just ground it and ate the hull and everything, or how you separated it, because that's It's almost impossible to do in your kitchen. Well, that's my little 2 cents.
Thank you. Yeah, they're reminiscent here a little bit.
It's been a long time.
Probably got new chickens by now.
It's been a long time since we had.
Oh well, yeah.
Actually, we got so many bears in the house. It's a
Oh.
lot different.
It's a wilder place.
It's a wilder place.
Everything is worse. Well, thank
I
you
have a
for that.
question you want to ask?
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah, good point. Anyone have questions? We still have a little time.
The main grain was that would have been milled here, or was it a mix all the time?
Main grain we took was corn and bundled oats. And hay, of course, they put minerals in it and salt. And then, of course, molasses and stuff like that to make it nutritional and tasty for the cattle.
Corn was absolutely the main thing because everything on a farm can eat corn. Horses, pigs, sheep, chickens, all your birds, dogs love cornbread. And the only thing that doesn't like corn is the cat. And I used to give lectures to little kids and say, "What do cats eat?" And they said, mice eat. And they said, "No, let me get this straight here." Oh, and I said, "What?" And the mice eat corn. And they said, "Well, what do the mice eat?" And they said, "They eat cheese." And I said, "No, on the farm they don't eat cheese. They eat corn. Cats don't eat corn, but what the mice eat." So in a way, cats do eat corn. And it would be a kind of a marker between the poorest people, and the people would be ashamed if you had company and you could only feed them cornbread, you would be embarrassed. Flour, and this goes all the way back to a European thing. Corn is Native American. Wheat is actually Mediterranean, but also Europe. So it was thought to be more refined, and even political implications to the thing. But people ate corn. Poor people ate corn at least twice a day, and the poorest people ate corn maybe 3 times a day. You eat mush for breakfast, you make cornbread for lunch, and you don't want to heat your stove up, get the house hot for dinner, so you have cornbread and milk for supper. But if you've got company, you try to have biscuits for breakfast. But absolutely, over 140 meals in this book, and probably a third of them ground wheat, but every single one of them ground corn. Corn won't keep as long; you got to go more often. So it's if you look at some old pictures from the 20s and the hillsides, there's a nice 5 or 6 acre wheat field. Everything's in corn that you can guess. So everything ate corn. Yeah. That was a good question. Well, Roy knows about it. He's been out there hoeing corn. I just talk about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ricky, did it take a special stone ideally for the grind wheat as opposed to the stones to grind corn?
They are dressed differently, but Howard or Jeff would know about that. That the stones for wheat versus corn or versus buckwheat or whatever.
Well, the stones for buckwheat weren't used for corn. They were used for buckwheat and for rye. And also the same sifting mechanism could be used for rye. So this mill did buckwheat. It also did rye. I remember bringing some rye here when Harry had some customers that wanted some rye flour.
And oh gosh, I've lost my train of thought again.
Well, one thing at one time there were a number of mills around here that could grind buckwheat, and they lost market and basically sold off their buckwheat equipment, and that left only one mill in the area, which was Roberson's mill. And of course, the reason it stayed in business as long as it did, it made the real stuff, the real flour, the unadulterated flour.
You can get the mix some places, but not the plain flour.
Well, reference has been made to some millers that weren't exactly honest. And
English.
In some places, they would take the wheat brand, not the wheat brand, but the brand that came off the buckwheat, run it back through the stones again, and put it through the sifters, and that would add to their yield of flour. But once you did that, you lost your market. And at one time, a lot of flour, buckwheat flour from Floyd County and Carroll County, went to New York City because that was the best market for it at the time. But when they started adulterating it, they lost that market. So a lot of people have never had a good buckwheat cake because they've never experienced a miller like Harry that did it right.
This is a question for you all, folks from outside or who've traveled a lot. I would be curious to know if buckwheat is for instance, there's this market in New York. Is this all of New York? Is there some nationality or some ethnicity for which buckwheat is a part of that traditional food, something that they ate from some European country or in some some small community within a big city that buckwheat would be something that they would eat. And I have a daughter-in-law who's from France, and she said they eat these little thin
Crepes.
crepes, yeah, and reminded her of that with something sweet or with ham or, and I can tell you buckwheat is good with the ham and a mustard and mayonnaise. Just roll it up. It's as good a snack as you'll ever find.
Well,
Yeah.
French can have their crepes. I'd as soon have a buckwheat cake.
Well, they got ambiance though. They do have that. Yeah.
Substance over shishi, huh?
Yeah. Frou frou or something. Other questions? That's a really good question, and someone here's got something to say about it. If you have a question,
I got a question. Do you have your books with you, Ricky?
I have a few. Yes, I do.
Ricky wrote a book, what, in the 90s?
I met Mr. Frank Webb in 1992. We spent 4 summers and weekends rambling around, dragging up and down all the creeks in Floyd County. And he died in '96. Wonderful fellow. He was the first cousin of Luther Webb that ran Webb's Mill. And it took me until 2010 to get the book written, and it came out in 2012. And I'll repeat this. You may not be interested in the book. It's perfectly fine. But if you want to look at it and look at the pictures, you can thumb through one, and you can find a entry on this mill, which is one of the longest because Harry was so generous. And Harry, I know that later in his life, his memory began to fail and so on. But that man, when I spoke with him, he could remember. For instance, he told me that there was a funeral in this mill one time. There was a cemetery on past. It must be in this direction, and the funeral procession was passing toward the cemetery. I guess they were going to have a graveside service, and it just came a downpour, and they stopped and carried the coffin into the church, and the mourners came in, and they had the service here in the church, and then had the group dispersed, and then when the rain subsided, they took the body onto the the cemetery to be buried. And I think he told me later what cemetery it was, but I don't think that's in the book. But the story's in this book. Yeah, the story's in the book. Yeah. Yeah. So I'd be glad for you to. But so they're right here. I'll stick around a little while. But questions, or do you have anything you want to share about your dad or the meal?
I've got a funny story about the repairs on this when he was a teenager, but he keeps disappearing.
Oh. Well,
if anybody interested, I could explain the process, what actually happened here.
No one speaks up. Let's do it.
He's up there too.
Well, until they get back, let's see who else has something.
We kept our fat back to season beans and stuff up at the 3rd floor, and there was ice on the ground. Harry wasn't home. So I bought my butcher knife, climbed up there, and got my fatback meat, started back up the road. And this lady stopped to pick me up. And I started to get in the truck, and I slid under it.
It was icy.
With my knife, but I didn't get hurt, and thank goodness I was able enough to get up back then. So.
Like that is today, but these human stories. Anybody got something you heard like that? Anything else you want to tell us like that? Great.
What did,
Anything else you want to tell?
I can't think of it right now.
You have to make biscuits every time they ground any flour and make buckwheat cake. Do you like buckwheat cake?
You like buckwheat cakes?
Yeah, my kids loved them. I had 7, so I had 1 pan, and I had to fry 'em buckwheat cakes. It took me about an hour and a half. While one was getting the other one pancake oven, be calling more buck cake, more buck cake. So it took us a while to get done with buckwheat cakes. And Harry loved them. He liked it with beef broth. Yeah, but I never could make it like his mama. But the kids liked it anyway.
And he wasn't bashful in saying that.
No, he'd tell me what was wrong.
And some of those stories are in my little book that I have for sale on the mill. So if y'all want that, just let me know. Our son's got a story about some repairs on the mill.
Well, I used to come to here and play in there when I was a kid. I don't know if everybody knew that or not, but it was pretty dangerous, thinking back, going upstairs and all the holes in the floor. And of course, I didn't think nothing of it then, kind of had Tommy watching after me. And I just remember I had a good time going in there and playing. But after I got a little bit older, Grandpa wanted me to paint the roof. And so I did. And I probably wasn't about 18 or 19 years old and built a chicken ladder. Me and my dad built a chicken ladder. And, I started on this end just painting with a paintbrush. And when I got to the far end, you got to take your chicken ladder down, paint the last sheet down from a ladder because, your chicken ladder's in the way. So we had a 40-foot ladder and it wouldn't reach. So my dad, I got it now, had a 69 Ford dump truck. And the bed was real high on it. And he took it on that end and backed it down against the mill. And it still wasn't tall enough with the ladder and the bed, so we had to raise the bed up to get the ladder to reach. And it still wouldn't go to the top, but he stood and held the ladder at the bottom. And I was scared. I didn't want to do it. And he looked at me and said, "Don't worry." He said, "The jaws of life's got a hold of you." He had his arms holding on to it. And I climbed all the way up to the top, and I had to hold one leg out and reach all the way to reach that very top sheet and painted that last one down. And there's no way in the world I'd ever do that again. But all the times I was down here, it was dangerous, but I never got hurt. So.
Well, several people did, and if you all know this family, you know that Virginia's grandfather lost his life here. And there were several drownings throughout Florida County, at least 3 or 4 drownings. People killed. A woman was killed in the wool carding mill because, as he was saying, OSHA had ever been heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Stairs without rails, big spinning pulleys and belts.
And there was holes, all kind of holes in the floors. In some places, it would just be boards laid across, that wasn't nailed down, if you stepped on the end, and of course I was careful about it, but still, looking back on it, there's no way I would have let my kids in there, but I slipped down here too, so I don't think anybody, I slipped off down here. Me and Tommy did, yeah. So I don't think I really told that many people, that.
I was just gonna say, Mom was talking about how she bagged flour and helped Daddy. So us kids kind of had an assembly line down here too, during the harvest, like September to December sometimes. So we had a little assembly line going. So I guess that was child labor, but we didn't know any different. That's just what you do. This lady, Mary Beth Cisco, she's very generous in her crochet and her Afghans that she makes. She has donated a raffle item, and it's an Afghan. Can you tell us about how long it took you to make that Afghan? That one there?
Well, usually about 30 to 50 hours, but that one probably not that long.
It's beautiful. But that's a raffle item if somebody wants to raffle that. And for a chance to win it. And then what you're working on now?
This is a commission actually. I got to get it facing the right way. Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl last year, so I've been commissioned to make this.
Beautiful. I love it.
I've been crocheting for 50 years, probably, and I taught my mother. She didn't teach me, it was the other way around.
That was different.
Regina, was this land and crop around here? Did y'all grow any grain?
Daddy never grew anything except for corn for the cows that I know of. We had like 3 vegetable gardens for just to feed 7 kids, a family of 9. But he always relied on the farmers, and they relied on him. So
how would he sell his toll? Like, would he bag it up and sell it?
Yeah, whatever. And Howard could tell you more. Let's let Howard tell more about that.
Harry didn't have to do too much selling. When people knew he had it, they came and got it right out of the mill. And of course, that was just in the fall. And but I had to sell it. I had to take it out and convince the store to buy it. And one thing the stores were always worried about it was the shelf time. How long can you keep a flower before it goes buggy? Well, with Mr. Roberson process, you could keep it over a year before you'd ever have any problems with it. If you put it in a freezer, it'll keep indefinitely. Of course, one thing about his process, the first thing it did, when the buckwheat came into the mill, of course, it got elevated up to the top floor. Then it got dropped out into the cleaner and the scrubber. And it came out of that scrubber looking like it had been polished, just as black as could be. But the idea was that scrubber was getting those bug eggs off those buckwheat hulls. And then the next thing it went through was the buckwheat huller, and that got rid of most of the hulls. So before it went into the stones, it was basically minus the hull. And of course the hull would have only gotten the way of grinding in the stones. So of course coming out of the stones, it went into the sifter, which had 3 different grades of silk screen to produce the very best refined buckwheat flour. And that's the kind you could mix up and it would rise up. And those, when you drop it in a hot skillet, it almost jump off that pan. It would never stick.
Oh.
But
you use lard.
Yeah, if you use lard, a properly cured skillet with lard, and you needed a high temperature to cook buckwheat cakes. 500 degrees is good. I didn't know that until I got one of these little things that measured the temperature and started pointing it at my frying pan. But when that lard gets to smoking really good, that's the time to put a buckwheat cake on. And if it's good flour and you prepared it right, it'll never stick. It'll come right off, and you can turn it over and come up with a really good cake.
Yes, how much toll did he get? The toll. How much did Harry take?
Oh, I don't remember the toll exactly. I'm thinking maybe it was a fifth, but I can't be sure.
Okay.
But no money ever changed hands. I brought stuff here and I took it away, but no money ever changed hands. And I went out into the field and sold my flour, and after the first couple of years, all I had to do was take it back to where I sold it before. I didn't have to resell them. They were ready to buy it again. And of course, I wish I could have expanded, but that isn't how it worked out.
Anyone have a question about the mechanical, the process of it? Because Howard could tell you as much as anyone you're apt to find in the next 30 miles. Jim, you got any stories from West Virginia about mills? Jim Costa here.
There's an old man down my way, and he ran his with an old.
Yeah, I grew up in southeastern West Virginia. I grew up in Summers County, close to the Hinton West Virginia is the county seat, but there was an old man in my community at Hillsdale, and he had a probably an old Meadows mill, and it was run, with an old Minneapolis Moline. But when I was a teenager, I always would go over there, and he always told me, he said, why? He said, people don't eat that yellow meal. He said, that's for the cattle and the hogs. He said, you want to eat that white meal. And that's exactly, you would take, we used Hickory King, that old long-eared Hickory King is one that was their favorite corn to make their cornmeal for people out of, But yeah, he had updated his mill to one of these big old stationary engines called a Minneapolis Moline. I always remember very well. Yeah, and then there's a fellow over in Second Creek. Ricky's been to that mill. Larry Mustang. He's up in his 80s now, and he runs a water-powered mill, or was. They were having trouble. His turbine was all silted in, and I don't know if they ever resolved that or not. But that mill was built in 1791, and it's been operable since that time and era. Yeah, on Second Creek in Monroe County seats of Union, West Virginia. Yep. And he did a lot of buckwheat. I know. Yeah, he used to do buckwheat flour. That's the only place you could get it regionally in our area, was to go over to Mustang's mill. Reed's Mill is the name of it. The Reed family ran it for many generations. Larry Mustang is it's an old family in our area. I know they were all in the Civil War. I found some history on his ancestors, and I think it's a German or a Huguenot. It may be Huguenot, French Huguenot name.
Traditionally, people, at least in Indian Valley, they ate white cornmeal, and even after the yellow hybrid was introduced, they continued to go a little patch of the white for their cornmeal. And as you said, the yellow was for the animals. We should include sawmills also. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there was a sawmill here. Yeah.
I don't remember it, but I know that.
Virtually any large mill that was built before 1900, before steam came in here, they would also be a sawmill. And there's a lot of good stories about sawmills, and I'll tell y'all one here, and unless somebody had something else to say, we'll start thinking about winding up. But Howard or Roy may have something else to say, but I want to tell you a sawmill joke. Could have happened right here. It's another one of those you just plug it in, but guys are working at the sawmill one day, and the sawyer is the guy that he pulls that stick. They call it the money stick. Mm-hmm. And it moves you put the log on a carriage, and you clamp it there with these things called dogs. They keep it on there like a good dog would. And then he's got a handle he pulls, and it pulls that thing over like an inch or a 3/4, whatever size board you want to saw. And then you pull that money stick, and it goes through and it saws it. And with a circular saw, you can imagine, like if you take a thin piece of metal and spin it or flop it, the noise it makes. So you've got to take that big saw, that circle, and put tension in it so that when it begins to spin, it flattens out and it won't wobble. And under the table where the saw comes across, where the log comes by, beneath that is a thing like a tuning fork, and it's got a screw on each side and a little wooden button, and you take a wrench and you screw those things in till they almost touch that thing, and that helps keep it from wobbling. That's called a saw guide. And one of the sawyer's job is to adjust that thing. So anyway, you take the table off the guard, you take that up, and then you got to lean in there and you turn those screws till it hits that thing. And he was careless and he leaned in too far, and he sawed his ear off. And so he stopped the saw on the motor, and he said, "Boys," he said, "I've cut my ear off. Would you help me look for it?" So they was glad for a break, they's tired. So they all started digging around looking for that, and in the sawdust there underneath the saw. And one of them figured, well, maybe there's a chain that comes through there, and it's called a groundhog, and drags this dust out. So he ran over to that sawdust pile and climbed up on it, and he right on the top of it there was an ear, and he picked it up, and he shook it off, and he held it up, and he said, "Is this it?" And the sawyer looked at it, and he said, "No." He said, "Mine had a pencil behind it." So There's your sawmill joke. We always got something to say there.
I'll tell you one more. We're talking about the white corn. We had a certain place we grew our corn for a meal. It was above the creek on a long, slender field. It wasn't about 30 yards wide, but it was about 300 yards long.
Ooh.
Before that, we found a can of snuff that somebody come to our house and lost. Our brother Ray and I, we hid that snuff to the proper time, and we was given instruction one morning to go and hold that corn out, you know. And we figured that'd be a good place to try that snuff out. We took our hose over there and hoed a little bit of corn. We decided to try the snuff out, so we tried it out, and we got sick as a mule. Some way the creek got above the cornfield, and we was sick about 3 or 4 hours. We vomited all over the place, and we got better by milking time. It's a good thing, because we didn't hold no corn, but we finally got better and able to go ahead and finish the day out by milking the cows. That's my first and my last try a dip snuff.
Howard, you got anything to say?
Well, it was my good fortune to know Harry Roberson. It meant for an interesting decade in my life when I was raising and selling buckwheat flour. And I'm sorry those times are gone, but I'm glad I have them in my memory.
Yeah. Well, here's to Harry Roberson. Served this county and this community well. He was a charming, friendly fellow, always glad to talk with you, and always had something interesting to say.